After taking a hit to save my husband from an accident, I was left teetering on the brink of life and death. Now, as my discharge day from the hospital finally approached, it was clear my husband had no concern for my well-being. "We are having a party. I'm inviting my work, you better get everything ready, buddies, s." And as if that wasn't enough, after I managed to pull together the preparations, barely on my feet, he shoved me into the storeroom. Is there anything more heartless than this? The one who pulled me from the depths of despair was an unlikely savior. This person would lead to my husband losing everything. My name is Mary. I'm a graphic designer at a small company, living with my husband Max. He's an educated elite, working for a big firm, seemingly on the cusp of a promotion. Lately, with the addition of a promotional exam to his usual workload, he's been busier than ever, and I've ended up handling most of the household duties to support him. I've been recognized at work myself, busy but fulfilled, yet I find myself unable to ask for help with the housework, seeing how hard he's working, even on weekends. On a day off, seeking a breath of fresh air, we decided to go for a walk. The weather was splendid, and as we meandered through our neighborhood, chatting aimlessly, that's when the accident struck. Passing by a construction site for what was to be a new apartment complex, a sudden crash from above caught our attention. Glancing up, I saw a steel beam plummeting towards us. "Max, watch out!" I screamed and pushed him out of harm's way. But as he fell to the ground, I found myself pinned under the beam. He screamed my name, his face pale, but the agony was too much for me, and I fainted. I woke up on a hospital bed. I'd been taken there by ambulance after the accident and had undergone surgery that saved my life, though I was left with numerous injuries. The most severe was to my left arm, which was so badly damaged it had to be amputated. With tears in his eyes, my husband apologized. "This is my fault, your arm is gone because you saved me. I'm so sorry." But I couldn't respond, just sat there in shock for a long time. As I began to recover and accept the loss of my arm, my husband doted on me, and I started rehabilitation. It was incredibly challenging at first, as I had been comatose for a while and suffered many injuries. Struggling to find balance with crutches because of my missing left hand, I felt overwhelmed, but with my husband's support, I managed to push through the rehab. Then came the day of my discharge. My husband seemed overjoyed at my return home, suggesting we celebrate. But what came next was a shock. "The celebration will include my colleagues, so you're in charge of the food and drinks. Make sure you put your heart into the cooking," he said. He expected me, with only one hand, to prepare an entire meal. Hold on. I only have one hand now, I can't possibly do all that. I tried to explain, but he just scowled. "Useless, aren't you? If you can't handle this, how will you manage life?" "Figure it out," he retorted coldly. I was stunned by his cruelty. He had seen my struggles with rehabilitation, yet he was so callous. As I stood there, speechless, he added, "And it better all be homemade. I won't tolerate any shortcuts or store-bought stuff." Then he walked away, leaving me to face his harsh expectations alone. My mind went blank with my husband's attitude, and I was unable to move for a while. More than being simply shocked by my husband's heartless words, my spirit was shattered by becoming one-armed due to the accident. It was fair to say I was in no condition to make sound judgments. Given that my husband had always had the stronger say in our relationship, I was never able to argue or defy him. On the day of the discharge celebration, I dragged my still aching body around, preparing for the party in a daze. As expected, my husband did not offer to help, lounging indifferently in the living room. With my now one-armed body, which refused to move as I wanted, it took me many times longer than usual to get the preparations done. As I slumped into a chair, exhausted from the effort, my husband dealt me another cruel blow. "You stay in there. Don't you dare come out, your pitiful sight is an embarrassment," he said with a cold stare, pulling me from the chair and shoving me into the shed in the yard, then slamming the door shut. Dazed from fatigue, I couldn't grasp his sudden action and found myself locked in the shed without uttering a single word of protest. While I was still dazed from the shock, It seemed that my husband's colleagues had arrived, and the party had started. The merrymaking was so loud that I could hear it from inside the shed. Why am I, the guest of honor for my own discharge celebration, locked up in this place? What on earth had I done to deserve this? I felt miserable, as if I were crouching at the bottom of despair. Whether it was the strain or the aftermath of the day's efforts, I realized I had developed a fever. Overwhelmed by the ordeal, I had no choice but to lie on the cold, dark floor of the shed. I'm not sure how much time had passed when suddenly the shed door was flung open and a man's voice asked, "Are you okay?" as bright light flooded in. The man who opened the door was younger than my husband and me, yet he wore his suit with an air of authority. Seeing me lying there, his eyes widened with concern, and he helped me up, pressing a water bottle from his bag against my neck to cool me down. The bottle should have been at room temperature, but to me, it felt refreshingly cool, and I closed my eyes, enjoying the sensation. In a weak voice, I expressed my thanks, and with a worried frown, he said, "Let's get you inside to rest," helping me towards the entrance of the house. The moment we entered the living room where the party was taking place, my husband looked shocked but said nothing of concern. Frustrated, perhaps, by my husband's reaction, the man supporting me demanded, "What is the meaning of this? Why is your wife, who has a fever, left in the shed?" To which my husband, his face flushed with drink, laughed mockingly. "Huh? I just hid her away because she looked pathetic floundering about. I didn't know anything about the fever." Seeing my husband's complete lack of concern, I felt my heart crumble with a noise I could almost hear. "And who are you anyway? Don't recognize you, are you new here?" My husband asked sullenly, his voice sounding distant as I stood there, stunned. That's when the man supporting me shouted, "Enough! How can you neglect your own family like this? What are you thinking? It's lamentable that someone like you is part of our company, let alone going to be under my supervision." His words left my husband and his colleagues dumbstruck. Then he revealed a shocking truth that astounded everyone present. He was the next president of the company, having worked at an overseas branch for several years. Moreover, he was scheduled to move to the domestic head office next month as the direct supervisor of my husband's department, having just returned to the country a few days ago. Apparently, only a few people at the head office, such as the current president, were aware of his existence, so no one there recognized him. He had come to briefly show his face after hearing about the wife of an employee who had been seriously injured, only to find the guest of honor lying collapsed in the shed. I was shocked beyond words to hear groaning from the shed and then to find you, your wife, fallen. Really, what an atrocious way to treat the wife who protected you at the cost of her own well-being. As soon as it was clear he was the next president, my husband's face turned ashen. And he stammered a defense. It's not. I didn't. My wife just took a rest in the shed on her own. It wasn't my doing." Faced with my husband's attempt at self-preservation, I finally snapped and shouted. "Enough is enough. You say it's a celebration for my discharge, but you shoved all the preparations onto me and didn't lift a finger to help, just barked orders. And then you locked me away in the shed because you thought I looked pitiful. Stop making a mockery of me." With tears streaming down my face, I unleashed the fury of the cruel treatment I had endured from my husband. And then the colleagues, who had been watching the exchange between my husband and the next president in confusion, erupted, "What the hell is going on?" It seemed my husband had been deceiving them, saying I was just stepping out for a moment. Or "I think she'll be here soon." Since the celebration had started. I thought it was strange that she hadn't shown up, but to think she was locked up in the shed. "And you pushed all the preparations onto your wife who's just recovered. Why would you do such a cruel thing?" While everyone present condemned my husband, he refused to admit his guilt and spat out his reasoning as if in defiance. Mary's only skill was housework, so I thought I'd do her a favor, get her back to her old self by pushing her hard with rehab. It was all with good intentions, good intentions. His self-serving rationale left me too angry to speak. But the next president spoke sharply in my defense, his gaze fixed on my husband. "You may not know this, but but she is an exceptional graphic designer. She is certainly not just good for housework, is she? As it turns out, the company I work for is a subsidiary of my husband's employer. Somehow, he knew about the quality of my work. Being unexpectedly praised for my professional efforts, I momentarily forgot my anger towards my husband and felt a surge of happiness. On the other hand, my husband seemed jealous of the praise and belittled me, even mentioning my injury. Humph. As if that matters, you can hardly work with just one hand now. It's just past glory. Everyone looked at my husband with contempt as he continued to demean me. I had completely lost patience with him and no longer wanted anything to do with him, so I said what I had been thinking. That's enough. I want a divorce. I wondered why I had saved such a person, why I had to suffer such a severe injury in his place. As I felt this emptiness, I asked for a divorce. Whether he understood or not, my husband just stood there with his mouth agape. Leaving him behind, the next president took my hand and said warmly, "Please don't hesitate to ask for anything you need." My husband's colleagues also offered comforting and encouraging words, and before I knew it, my husband had disappeared from the scene. The divorce went through smoothly. I also filed for compensation for the emotional distress my ex-husband caused, backed by the testimony of the president-elect and my colleagues. The lawyer who advised me was fully on my side, and the proceedings went smoothly, I believe. When my injury had healed, I was called to my workplace to discuss my future working arrangements. Having lost an arm, I am afraid that I could no longer work as before, probably facing a push towards resignation. When I arrived, expecting the worst, I found my boss and the next president of my ex-husband's company standing. Surprised to see the next president, he offered me a position as a graphic designer within the company's employment program for people with disabilities. "Your work is truly exceptional. It would be a shame to let go of such talent just because you've acquired a disability. Would you please continue to lend us your abilities within a reasonable scope for our company?" Moved by his sincerity, I accepted his offer and decided to keep working. My coworkers treated me as they always had, considerate without being overbearing. They entrusted me with tasks within my capabilities, allowing me to return to work with peace of mind. Working in such a supportive environment, my design quality seemed to improve, and my income has actually increased from before. The injury and disability weren't good things, but looking at the outcome alone, I am more than satisfied. I live each day with a sense of fulfillment, cherishing every moment. As for my ex-husband, everybody found out how he treated me in the company, and it seems almost all the employees hated him. He was sidelined, pressured into resigning, and left the company quietly. What he is doing now, I do not know.